Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Crafty Author. My name is Anissa. Have you ever wondered how to make your own quilt binding? Well, today I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do that. So let's get started. Okay, the first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that your piece of fabric is ironed pretty flat. Now, typically I like to use the same fabric for the binding as I do for the backing, but unfortunately for our Easy Baby quilt, I ran out. So I pulled a primary color that I was using within the quilt, and this is what I'm going to use for the backing. It's just a really pretty light pink. So what I like to do, because this is a long piece and I've already gone ahead and measured it out. Now there's a couple of ways you can measure your quilt to figure out how much binding you're going to need. I prefer to, instead of taking measurements with a measuring tape, which you are more than welcome to do, and then you could cut it accordingly, I like to take my piece and measure it against the actual quilt itself so that I know how much I'm going to need. I always make more than what I need because it's better to have more left over than it is to have to stop while you're binding and sew another piece of fabric to your binding piece to make it go all the way around. You also need to take into consideration when you're going around the corners because you're going to be folding them to make them miter, and that does take up a little bit extra fabric. Don't worry, I will show you how to do that when we go to bind this baby quilt. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I have this really long piece of fabric. I like to fold mine in half, and the reason I do that is it just makes it more manageable for me to cut it. So I'm going to fold it. I folded it in half once, and I'm going to go ahead and fold it in half again. Okay, so now I have this nice folded piece of fabric. And I am going to flip it. After I fold it, I'm going to turn it so that I have it going long ways. This will save me a lot of time with having to sew. We're going to have to go ahead and sew these pieces together, but it just makes it easier to cut it in one strip. Now, I am going to be cutting 2.5-inch strips for my binding. So I'm going to take my large quilt ruler, and I'm just going to come over here on the edge of this piece here, on the edge, and I am going to flip my ruler to the right side first. I'm going to cut off this rough edge here because I don't want that. I want this to be as straight as I can possibly get it. Now, for this quilt, I need 4 strips of 2.5-inch strips, but I am actually going to cut 6 just because I want to make sure that I have enough fabric for the binding to go around my quilt. And then I'm just going to measure at 2.5 inches, and I am going to give this a cut. And then you should have something that looks like this when you open it up. One long strip. And I'm just going to continue to repeat this process. And like I said, I'm going to cut 6 pieces. So there's 2. I have all 6 pieces cut out. So now we're ready to sew those together and get them ready for the binding. This is what I had left over from that piece of fabric. So it cut 6 of them rather nicely, and it left me with a 2-inch strip. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the scrap pile and use it for another project. Probably will keep this also for like a scrap quilt. Now, before we start sewing, there's a couple of things that we want to do. So you can sew when you're attaching the binding, you can sew the two pieces of your fabric together, okay? And what I mean by that, because we have to join these strips, is you can either put them together like this, not right sides facing each other. This one doesn't have a right and a wrong side, but then you would just go ahead and stitch. I would stitch here because I can see the selvage edge and I don't want that in there. Or you could do a 1/4 inch seam if you don't have your selvage edges, if you cut them. Then when you would open it up, it's going to look like this. So it will sew those pieces together. I like to do mine a little differently, and it just gives it a little nicer edge when you're sewing. So all I do is I take one piece and I put it down, face down, and then I just put the long piece over it like so. And I let this piece hang over just a tad. Like I said, it's got selvage edge, so I don't want that in my blanket. So I'm going to do that. Now you can pin this or you don't have to. I'm going to just pop a pin in here just for demonstration purposes. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew from this corner here diagonal to this corner here. And then when I'm finished, I will clip these and fold it out. And that's what it will give me, is a piece that looks like this. All right, so I'm going to start sewing on the diagonal here. I've got my needle down and I'm just going to start sewing. I know the sun is extra bright today and I do apologize for that, but I can't help it. That's just the sun, so. And it's as easy as that. So now I have my piece sewn. This is what I have after I've sewn it. So now what I'm going to do is I went ahead and cut off the top and the other piece that was left over. I'm going to cut 1/4 inch here. I'm going to cut this triangular leftover flap that we have. And I'm just going to give that a slight finger press. And that is what you should have. So I'm going to go ahead and finish doing these, and then we'll get to making the binder. I'm going to show you how I did that one more time, just so you can see how that's done. Craft room is a mess. I need to clean it. Been doing a lot of sewing here lately. Okay, so as you can see, I have my piece of fabric that's flat, and I'm just going to take this piece and put it over it, just slightly over. We're going to pin it. Pin it and sew down the diagonal. So go ahead and do that, and then you're going to clip this excess off, and then you'll have this triangle part on the back once you flip this open, and you'll cut that 1/4 inch, and then you should have a perfectly diagonal seam going on your binding, and it makes it lay really nice, and it'll look really nice on your blanket as well. Now that I have everything sewn together, I am going to bring my strip over to my ironing board, and the seams that we just sewed, I am going to press them flat with my iron. So I want to press them open. Now normally you don't press a seam open, but this really helps when you're sewing your binding, so you don't have bulk in the seam area. So that's what I do first, is I just go ahead and open these up, iron them flat. And I can show you another way to do this as well, which I'm going to do right now because that's very time consuming. So you can kill two birds with one stone here. All I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take my my strip, okay, and I'm going to fold it in half. That's all I'm going to do is just fold this in half, and then I'm going to press. And that's how you make your binding. Just press it in half. You want to make sure it stays straight. You could put it up against something if you like a ruler to keep it straight. I don't. Probably should, but I don't. Okay, so now we're coming up to this seam that we made here. So I'm just going to fold it in half, just like we've been doing. And I'm just going to keep going. Keep giving it a press. Okay. And now you can see how that seam looks right here. And this is what it looks like on the other side of it. So they're not butting up, creating that bulk in that seam. And that's what you want to avoid, is the bulk. I'm just pressing, I'm not ironing. You can also use starch if you would like to do that, just to keep it so that it's nice and stiff. I don't do that. And I don't typically have an issue. So you need to find ways that will work for you, and do whatever works for you, because that's the only way that you will know. So practice, play around with different ideas. I've been doing this for a really long time, and I still learn something new every time. So here's what I was talking about to save a little bit of time with these seams. So now we've come to another one, okay? And instead of doing them all first, I just kind of do them as I go along. So I'm going to go ahead and give this one a press. I'm going to open it up, press it. And I'm just going to continue doing my thing. So I'm going to finish doing this, and then I'll show you what we're going to do next. So now our binding is done. And I like to do it before I make the quilt. That way, when I'm done quilting and I square it up, I'm ready to go. I have all of this ready, because it's really kind of a pain to stop and then have to make it. And it's just better to do it beforehand, in my opinion. So that's how I do mine. Now what I'm going to do is I have this lovely little thing called a binding baby. You might have seen her before. She's so cute. I just love her. She's made after me. I had her custom made. She's beautiful. And I love her little flower. So she comes off, but she sits on this little spool. And when I bind, she holds my binding there. And it makes it easier for me to sew. That way I don't have my binding on the floor and whatnot. I used to hang it over my shoulder. So if you don't have one of these, you can hang it over your shoulder, or you can put it in a bucket or something to keep it kind of nice. Do it, like I said, you have to find what works for you. If you are interested in one of these little guys, the links are down below in the description box on where to get this. I'm not paid to advertise for it. I bought it with my own money, and I love it. So here's what we do with the binding baby. This is what I do with my binding baby. She's got a little slot. She's got 2 of them. And all I'm going to do is just slide it in there. And then I'm just going to start rolling it up. And I can never get this perfect. So there's that. But It just helps to keep this all wound really nice. See, I can't even do this straight. It's okay. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that it gets put on and, you know, it's not dragging on the floor. So, sorry. I'm trying to straighten it out with my hands and it's kind of crazy. So, we're just going to spin her around. It also keeps your binding from tangling like what's happening here. So irritating when it does that, you know. Part of quilting, I suppose. I don't know how I did it all those years without something like this, because I always have binding that is constantly doing this and it drives me nuts. So better to happen now than when I'm sewing. So you see how I'm just spinning her, and that's putting the binding on, which is fabulous. I love it. Except for when I have to straighten it out again. Okay, I'm going to go off camera and fiddle with the rest of this, and then I will show you what it looks like when it's done, because I don't think you need to sit here and watch me untangle this binding. And there she is, all beautifully wound with our binding on it. Isn't that beautiful? Makes it so much easier. This is what it looks like from the back side. And then when you're sewing, she'll turn, and makes it easier for you to get this off the roll and onto the actual quilt itself. So I also forgot to mention that the binding baby can also fit on your sewing machine. So if you have a vertical thread holder that you're not using, you can set her on there and she'll spin around. So I love it. I'm intrigued by these simple little gadgets, but I love it. So thank you for joining me today on how to make your own binding. We are doing this so that we can put this on the Easy Baby quilt that we've been working on. It's part of a series. I will link all of the videos down below. I have it in a playlist, so feel free to click on that and watch it. Love it. If you found value in this video, please give it a thumbs up. Give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. You'll get notified each time that I upload a new video. And keep on crafting. I hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and I will see you next time on The Crafty Author. Bye-bye.